there. Get this. Oh, all right. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us for our webinar today regarding the census. We'll just give a few minutes for folks to log on. Thanks so much. Can you see people are joining? Yeah. Let's see. Where on? Oh. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us for our lunchtime webinar today regarding how to prepare your nonprofit organization for the census, which is here today, and it's really exciting. My name is Hannah Lokop. I'm Program Manager of the Greater Pittsburgh Nonprofit Partnership. I'm really pleased today to be joined by Kelsey Degnan and Irene Yelovich from the Allegheny County Library Association and the Carnegie Library of Pittsburgh, respectively. Our organizations, as well as the Greater Pittsburgh Nonprofit Partnership, the city, and the county, have all been working together over the past year, probably more, to help prepare our region in order to have an accurate count in the 2020 census. It's a really exciting partnership, and GPNP, as a network of nonprofits throughout our region, 10 counties, we're really invested in the census because we know that nonprofits are the trusted voices who can help our communities who are historically undercounted be counted accurately this year and to make sure our region matters. So with that, I will ask Kelsey and Irene to introduce themselves, and I'll hand over the mic. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you. This is Kelsey. I am the Communications and Connections Coordinator at the Allegheny County Library Association, and my esteemed co-host.
Hi, I'm Irene Yelovich. I am a Senior Librarian at Carnegie Library of Pittsburgh.
Okay, we're going to start by looking at the agenda today. We'll begin, the first part of our presentation will be why the census matters, the impacts that you can expect it will have. There we go, sorry about that. The impacts from the national level to the state of Pennsylvania, to Allegheny County, and importantly to your organization, why it matters for you, your staff, and the people you serve, and then what you can expect for the 2020 census. You've probably heard there's a few updates to the census this year, and it's been in the news for other things that will not be included, and we'll go over that. And then part two will cover census engagement. So the logistics of census outreach, what you can expect for the timeline of either being a census hub or conducting your own census outreach, some best practices, frequently asked questions, and what you need to know as a stakeholder to make sure that we're doing the best for our communities. We'll then cover resources, and there will be time at the end for us to look at some questions that we've received in previous trainings as a little bit of a prompt for you to think about your own questions, and Hannah will help us direct those questions. Feel free to type those in either at the end or as we go along, and we'll be sure to get to as many as we can.
Yes, and the way that folks can do that is by clicking on your Q&A button that you'll see at the bottom of your screen, or you can do so in the chat.
Great. Okay, so we like to start with this little bit of census trivia. Irene and I have been involved in the census efforts for Allegheny County, City of Pittsburgh, since the end of 2018, and so we have come across all these little strange factoids, but one that we really like is the picture of Alaska being counted. It begins being counted in January, so it's probably already through the majority of its counting. Every year for over 100 years, it's been counted in January because it's easier to travel in Alaska in the middle of winter time across snow and with snowmobiles and sled dogs and bush planes than it is when the snow starts to melt. So there's your little census factoid for today. Okay, part one, why the census matters.
So as Kelsey mentioned, she and I have been working with the city and county on the Complete Count Committee since the end of 2018. And I just wanted to give you some background on the makeup of that committee. It was made up of stakeholders from all over the county, and we split up into 6 subcommittees. So I just wanted to go over those briefly. The first is the Civic Fabric Committee, and that's where Kelsey and I were representing libraries, but also faith-based groups, community organizations, federally funded health centers, places like that all made up that committee. The Community Voices Committee represented groups that might be at risk of an undercount. So that included kind of all of your special interest groups, Latinx, immigrants, LGBTQ, older adults, disabled, veterans, the list goes on, and that was just made up of those groups from around the county. The Data Subcommittee really supported the work that the rest of us were doing by helping us identify what groups in Allegheny County are at the biggest risk for an undercount, where are they located, and just generally helping us in that way. The Education Committee is a little self-explanatory, but that was made up of representatives from every education level, from pre-K and early childhood, all the way up through grad school and trade schools. The Government Subcommittee was comprised of municipal representatives as well as officials from the city and county. And then finally, the Workforce Group reflected the larger businesses and labor communities in the county. And that one was a little bit different than the rest, because while the rest of us are a little bit more public-facing, they are messaging more internally and also thinking about ways to get the message out through means that they have. So for example, putting a message on a bill or communicating to LIHEAP customers, something that Duquesne Light had mentioned. So hopefully by now you have thought a little bit about the census and why it's so important. But just to introduce it a little again, those figures that we get from census data define everything from political districts to infrastructure and basically how federal funding is distributed throughout the county. And this is the dollar impact for the entire country. It's $675 billion. So that's just a huge financial impact that relies on census data. And for Pennsylvania specifically, the figure is over $26 billion. And that is only for the 16 largest federally funded programs. So the actual dollar figure is even larger than that. And this is just a little snapshot of what some of those programs are. You can see that Medicaid takes a huge chunk of funding relying on census data, but also things like SNAP, the school lunch program, Head Start, Section 8 housing, highway planning and construction. The list goes on, but this all relies on an accurate count to get the right amount of resources out.
What is the dollar impact for Allegheny County? Well, we look at things like infrastructure. In 2018, over $129 million was spent on highway and road construction projects that's in Allegheny County using federal funds that are determined by the census. So think about all of your gripes about the potholes in Pittsburgh and wider in Allegheny County, and realize that the numerous construction projects that we see going on in our county rely on federal funds that are determined by census data. Community Development Block Grant Funding is another program that is funded using census data or using census data to allocate the funds. So in Allegheny County, we received $18 million in 2018 alone, and the city of Pittsburgh received an additional $14 million in that year. So community development block grant funding is used to benefit low to moderate income residents, and it can be used for a variety of projects. For Irene and I being in the library system here in the county, we often relate it back to our library staff, though I think it's very applicable to other organizations. But libraries across the county, across the country, beg your pardon, use CDBG funding to improve ADA accessibility. I know community centers and other organizations use it for similar means, but it can have a big impact for our organizations and for the people we serve.
Public transit is another huge issue. I was mentioning before we started that I like talking about this slide because it's an issue that's kind of close to my heart. You know, bus service could be better in Allegheny County. For example, my neighborhood has a bus that does not run on weekends, which, you know, really puts a lot of people, you know, out of service if they have jobs or something like that. So $28 million from the Port Authority budget came from census data. We need to get that reliable count because that's about 22% of their budget. And we need to know where people are living in Allegheny County and where we need to allocate those funds. Food security is another big issue. I think as a librarian, we see a lot of people who are facing food insecurity. The actual figure is about 1 in 7 people are dealing with food insecurity, and programs like SNAP, WIC, the school meals program, summer meals program, that all relies on census data. Education is another big area where we need to get an accurate count. Title I grants, federal Pell grants, career, technical education, anything like that all uses data that comes from the census.
As Hannah said as we just began, we are the trusted voices in our communities, the organizations, our community partners, our nonprofit partners. We are the trusted voices. So we're positioned in such a way to help people and alleviate safety concerns, of which there are many for many people and for different reasons for this decennial census. And I also like to point out that regardless of what kind of organization and what kind of mission you have, I would wager a bet that doing your best to meet the needs of your community probably fits within your mission, and therefore census outreach and trying to achieve an accurate count for Allegheny County, this fits neatly into your mission. And for library staff, we are uniquely positioned by our actual position. The stat is 99% of hard-to-count census tracts are within 5 miles of a public library across the country, and 3/4 of those 99% of hard-to-count housing tracts live within 1 mile of a public library. So even though this webinar is applicable for all kinds of organizations, I point this out because libraries and other community organizations, we are spread throughout the county. We are here to serve our patrons, but we're also here to connect and partner with organizations who might require our help, our technical services, our technology, and think about partnerships and ways that you can use them to help improve the census count for Allegheny County. And I also like to point out that if there is an undercount and our social programs don't see the funding that they need to properly serve people, then truly free public institutions like libraries and other community organizations will be looked to even more so to meet that difference, right, to meet the gap. And for some of us, that's a bit of a scary proposition that we could be leaned upon even more heavily. So it's kind of in our own best interest, in our own self-interest, to ensure there is adequate funding by having a fair count. Okay, so as we had alluded to this year, there's a few changes which we will go over. The census is going online. Newsflash, if you hadn't heard yet, the Census Bureau will be encouraging people to respond primarily online. So you will receive a mailer and it will prompt you to go online and complete the census there first. There will be an option to call in. You can still call in and either complete your census or to have help with the online portion through the phone. And there will be a paper form that is mailed out to you eventually if you do not respond online. But primarily, the Census Bureau is trying to move things online.
So another big issue that you have hopefully heard of over the past year or so is the citizenship question. It will not be on the census form. My big fear with this question is that the damage may have already been done. The current political climate, as we all know, is not necessarily immigration friendly, and so people are worried about it and might, still be worried even though the question's not going to be on there. A few things that we can do to reassure people are to let them know that this information cannot be shared with other agencies. So, for example, ICE cannot know, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. So again, security and privacy, this is a big concern this year. The confidentiality worries, and also because it's online, people are worried about digital security. So a few things to know and share with your clients might be that Census Bureau employees take an oath for their entire life to protect personal information. So even once they no longer work for the Census Bureau, they are still held to this. And if they violate that oath, they are subject to paying up to $250,000 in fines and or 5 years in prison. Information collected cannot be shared with immigration or law enforcement or any other government agency. And because it's online this year, we know that they're taking the highest level of cybersecurity measures and encryption. We don't know the details of what that looks like, but I feel fairly confident that it's going to be more secure than ordering from Amazon or online banking even. So it is the highest level of security. We have been talking a little bit about an undercount, and we know from past censuses that there are some groups that are at higher risk of being undercounted. So one of the biggest is children under 5, and that is a huge deal because if they're not counted, that's 10 years of their life that they're basically invisible. People living in alternative or overcrowded housing units, single-parent-headed households, racial and ethnic minorities, people who speak English as a second language or not at all, immigrants, people experiencing homelessness, renters and residents who move often, and people with disabilities. Those are all the largest groups, and they all face some barriers to being counted, which include language barriers, lack of internet access. That's a much bigger issue than you might think. Mistrust in government, concerns about privacy or cybersecurity, physical barriers, such as living in crowded units or places that are hard for a census enumerator to get to, and also non-traditional living arrangements.
I'd just like to jump in here and give a little bit more context about the lack of reliable broadband or internet access. We know that some figures put it at close to 20% of Allegheny County residents don't have reliable internet access at home. And in addition to that, we know that there is a persistent digital literacy divide, right? That we know many people, even if they do have access, may not have the skills or may not feel comfortable going online. And so this is where we need to think about how libraries, how other community organizations, how we can be of assistance to those people facing a digital literacy and digital access divide. Okay, this is the general timeline for the self-response and door-to-door operations for the Census Bureau. I do like to give people a little bit of additional background, though, about what's been happening behind the scenes with the Census Bureau in the past year or two. So before this week, March 12th, there has been a process of address canvassing. And this is where the Census Bureau works with different levels of government to receive a list of addresses, up-to-date addresses. Because if you think in 10 years, things might have changed quite substantially. Different housing units have gone up, others have come down. So there's been this transfer of addresses that happens between the Bureau and different levels of government. And then the Census Bureau actually has people on the ground walking around, making note of what has changed, where there are addresses that they might not have picked up on previously. And this includes also where people experiencing homelessness are currently staying. So that's happening at the moment in Allegheny County Census Bureau. Workers are walking around and are making note of where people are staying so that they can be counted. And we'll go into the detail of how that happens in a little bit. But back to the timeline that's on your screen. March 12th, this week, households will start to receive an invitation to respond online. It's a little paper form, and it will give you a unique census identifier, and it will give you all the details you need to go online. But you'll continue to receive reminder letters and prompts to go online through March into April if you haven't responded online. If you have, then you should not be receiving any additional mailings, so perhaps that's your motivation to fill it out and be done with it. But end of April will be the final postcard, and then begins the door-to-door operations, the enumeration phase, where the Census Bureau will have people walking door-to-door. But even through that period, you can still self-respond online right up until July 31st. Okay, we are looking at census engagement, and we'll begin by considering the local efforts that have been happening. We've already told you that we have been a part of the Complete Count Committee for Allegheny County. Our CCC, as they're known, was, we think, the first in the state, so props to the leadership. And we all came together, all of the different subcommittees that Irene laid out, to help educate and empower Allegheny County residents to ensure a complete and accurate count. Our subcommittees had numerous different strategies that we identified to help best count our communities, but we kind of coalesced around these 3 engagement initiatives. So the CCC leadership, in addition to its members, helped direct the development of a website, marketing campaign, and a toolkit. We have Census champions, partners, and hubs, these tiers of engagement. And we also prioritized the creation of a mini grants program.
So this is the website. It is becounted2020.org, and it's kind of a 2-pronged site. So half of it is oriented for Allegheny County residents and has things like FAQs and information about the census. And the other side, the side that you should be a little more interested, would be the side for organizations. So that's where you can find more information about those tiers of engagement, but you can also find a lot of resources, social media, images, and talking points, and things like that. And then these are the 3 levels of engagement that the Allegheny County Complete Count Committee came up with. The first is Census champions. So those are individuals who are really excited about the 2020 census. They have some standing in their community. They're interested in getting the word out about it. Census partners are organizations that can give out information. They can post on social media, things like that, but they might not be those organizations that are open to the public. So some of those workforce organizations, places like UPMC that are more internal focused, they can give information out to their workforce, but they might not be having people walk in to get assistance filling it out. And then census hubs are organizations that can do all of the above, but they're also going to be able to have the technology or the Wi-Fi or the telephone access to allow people to actually complete the census at those locations. So just to get more into census hubs, the requirements are pretty broad. They can be any kind of public-facing building, so community centers, churches, libraries, municipal buildings, any office that is open to the public. They should have open office hours, and we don't say what those have to be, just at some point you should be open to the public. Publicly accessible computers or Wi-Fi. You should have trained staff. So attending or watching this webinar is one way to get people trained. Be willing to help people fill out the census, and that could be sitting with them to help them with digital literacy barriers, or even just supplying a computer and helping them get to the right website, or sharing out the phone number they need to call. And then finally, the ability to share information and make sure you're getting the right information out.
Okay, the mini grant program that has been coordinated through the CCC, we had our first round of applications close on January 31st, but hoping that there will be a second round. So as soon as we know, we will share that widely. But the general eligibility criteria were that you should be a C3 organization or find a fiscal sponsor. It was a really easy application process. I think only 5 questions perhaps. They were really trying to make sure that any organization who wanted to do census outreach and engagement could be supported to do that. The funding priorities listed were pretty broad. You know, it could be to support the purchase of technology. It could be supporting staff hours to do this outreach, supplies. So it was anything that could help count historically undercounted populations and hard-to-count communities. Okay, the online response will obviously be the first time that any of us have a look at what the census looks like online. But we will begin to receive our mailers at the end of this week. We won't receive them all at the same time because, as you can imagine, if every household received a letter on the same date, we all tried to go online, that would be a bit of a disaster. But you'll have a unique identification code on the mailer, your census ID number. You don't actually need to have this census ID to respond online or via telephone. If you don't have it, you can just use your street address instead. The entire online survey has to be completed in one session. You can't save any drafts, and if there is no activity for 15 minutes, you could be logged out and you might have to start again. So it's really important to let people know that they should sit and complete their census in one sitting. Generally, the census should only take, they say it's 10 questions in 10 minutes. We know that if you have additional barriers, it might take you a little longer than that, but it shouldn't be a problem to complete it within that 15-minute, window. And certainly, you can always sit and think for a little bit, and as long as you don't go over that 15 minutes of inactivity. All data that is submitted online are encrypted. The confirmation, there will be a confirmation page that's displayed at the end, and you can print that confirmation page, but there won't be any email or text message confirmation. You'll just have the one page after you've completed your census.
So there are options for people who do not speak English. The online questionnaire and also the phone number, there are 13 available languages, including English. I won't read them all off, but that is the list of numbers on the slides. The phone will be open from 7 a.m. to 2 a.m., so it's a pretty broad window of time when they can call. And respondents can complete it in any of those 13 languages. We do know that there are more than 13 languages spoken in the country and in the county. So in addition to those options, there are 59 language guides. They are not the actual form, but they will walk people through the questions, through those 10 questions in 59 languages, and that includes Braille and large print. And that big https://my2020census.gov, that's the official website that people will go to in order to fill out their census.
Okay, now we're considering who should be counted in the household self-response. So just to emphasize, when the Census Bureau is sending out its census forms or an invitation to complete the census online, it's concerned about your household. It's not tied to your name, which is why libraries or other organizations, we can't have a stack of census forms set aside for patrons to pick up and complete then and there. It's tied to the house. So it's really concerned with whomever and everyone living in your house. Doesn't matter whether they're a relative or not. And the Census Bureau says that people should be counted where they spend the majority of their time. So anybody born on or before April 1st, 2020 should be counted in your household self-response. Everybody living in your household, whether it's family, friends, couch surfers, distant relatives, non-friends, they should be counted in your household if that's where they spend the majority of their time. Children splitting their time between households should be counted where they spend, again, the majority of their time. So if you're unsure, I would consider, where they spend the majority of their time being 365 divided by 2, and if, split it up in that way. Who should not count in your household self-response? Anybody born April 1st. So if you're expecting in May, unfortunately, they cannot be counted in this decennial census. College students living away from home. This is actually pretty surprising for some people, but if you think about it, the students need to be counted where they go to school because that's where they use resources. If the city of Pittsburgh student population were counted by their parents all across the nation, then Pittsburgh misses out on the resources that we need to properly support those students. Visitors shouldn't be counted within your household. Incarcerated family members get counted by other means, and we'll go over that in the next slide. Anybody who spends the majority of their time elsewhere shouldn't be counted, and mobile residents don't get counted through this household self-response. That text at the bottom is quite important. If people are unsure whether or not you've counted everybody in your household, for instance, if you do have children splitting their time between households and you're unsure if they were counted in their other household, you should count them also in your household. The Census Bureau has really rigorous processes of removing duplications. So they will see that if they have indeed been counted in two places, they will see that and they will remove one of those submissions. But the Census Bureau cannot conjure people out of thin air. If you don't count a child, then they are essentially invisible. So as much as possible, you want it to be accurate and to coordinate with people to make sure that you've listed everybody that needs to be listed in your household. But when in doubt, count the person. Okay, these are some of the other ways to count. We have transitory locations. So these are campgrounds, RV parks, marinas, hotels, motels, circuses, and carnivals. This is because you can imagine it might be pretty tricky to track down a circus or a carnival and know what address they're going to be at to send them their census ID number or their census form. And so census takers will actually go and visit these locations in that set period of time, and they'll have interviews with the individuals. Group quarters enumeration are places like nursing facilities, hospices, student housing, military quarters, and prisons. So group quarters are places that are owned by a third party, and the Census Bureau will work with that third party to have an exchange of information. Again, if you think about student housing and the amount of student housing that's in Pittsburgh alone, my goodness, the school administrators, they have all of the information that the Census Bureau needs for those 10 questions, and it's much easier for them to give that as a transfer of information than the Census Bureau trying to track down every student, knock on their door, and count people in that way. So this is, if you are a group quarter or you fall within this way to count, then you should have either been contacted by the Census Bureau or you can reach out to them. There's a link online if you just look up group quarters enumeration, and you can figure out if you've been scheduled or the way that you can get in contact with a Census Bureau employee to work that out. People experiencing homelessness. This is a way to count that's very near and dear to people's hearts, I think, because that's a question that comes up a lot as well. How are we making sure that people who are experiencing homelessness are still counted? There is a 3-day, 24-hour period of time, so 24 hours over 3 days, where the Census Bureau has a counting operation. They will go out for that entire time and work around the places that had been identified through that address canvassing, and they will work through places where they know people stay. They will work with different service providers. It's a huge push over 3 days to make sure they can catch absolutely everybody they possibly can.
So the actual form itself is not too intense. If you've ever gotten that big American Community Survey, it's huge, it's invasive, it has a lot of good information from it, but that's not what this is. So sometimes people get the two confused. This one literally is 10 basic questions about name, sex, age, birthday, race, ethnicity, relationship status, do you own or rent, and phone number. And that's about it. But there are a couple of new things in 2020. The first is that there are new options for same-sex partners under the relationship. So that's great. It's, opposite sex husband or wife, opposite sex unmarried partner, and the list kind of goes on from there. Race also has new expanded options for self-identifying. I feel like as Kelsey and I have worked on this over the past year and some months, we've learned all kinds of random trivia about the census, but something that really kind of blew my mind was that until 1960, race was not a question on the form, but was actually something that the enumerators, the people knocking on your door, had to judge for themselves and write down. So they would look at the person and decide what race they were, and that was how they got counted. So after 1960, there was, a big rise in Native American populations because people could self-identify. And another reason that it's important that it has these new expanded options is that there are still groups that don't get counted well. One group, for instance, is Arab Americans. They don't really have a single category that they might fit in, so now they can self-identify. And another important thing under the race question that has come up in some of the presentations we've done is whether people can identify as more than one, and yes, you can fill out as many as you need to. And, just to reemphasize that the citizenship question will not be included, and no matter how people identify, it cannot be shared with immigration or law enforcement. Kind of equally important as to what will be on the form is what won't be. And we already know there have been some scams around the census in Pennsylvania. So the official form will never ask for people's social security number. It will never ask for money or donations. It will not have anything on behalf of a political party. And of course, it will not ask for bank or credit card numbers. There is a page called Avoiding Fraud and Scams that is on the Census Bureau website, and it has a lot of good information, including phone numbers that people can call. And if you have someone knock on your door and you're not sure if they're an official census taker, that page will give you ways to identify someone, but you can also call that number to confirm. If you see misinformation or disinformation on social media, you can report that at rumors@census.gov.
One important thing on this slide I just wanted to add was if you think this is of interest to your community, if they're perhaps vulnerable, then why not print out something like those bullet points, what the census will never ask, and to highlight that. Highlight it if you are a census hub and you're going to have technology available, share it in social media. Just let people know that this is what they can and cannot expect from the census, so we're all informed. This is a really great video guide to completing the 2020 census. It runs through the online form. It'll show you what it looks like and what to do, where to press to get the language guides and the different language options. It will show you it will kind of troubleshoot through, but we're not going to go through it here. We do say though, if you only have limited time to try and train your staff, this is a really good place to start. Show them, especially from, I think it's about 2 minutes 30 on, is the meat of the form. One important thing this video does show though is it really wants to make sure that you don't use the forward and back buttons in your browser. You want to use the next and previous buttons within the census form. If you use the forward and back buttons in your browser, you could risk losing your session and have to start again. So it's important to know. All right, what to know when you're making a device available. You have to be very clear that you yourself are not an employee of the Census Bureau. And I think this is important whether you're making a device available or you're undertaking some other kind of census outreach. If you're planning door-to-door operations, if you're going to be sharing if you're going to be going to different organizations, encouraging a response, then you just need to make sure that it's clear you are not a Census Bureau employee. Okay, some frequently asked questions you might encounter from patrons or those you serve. I have lost my census ID number. Every household will be sent a unique census ID number, but as we had said previously, you don't need that. You can just use your street address. Sorry, I clicked ahead there a little too quickly. If you don't speak English, you can either go online or over the phone. You have those 13 language options, and you also have the 59 language guides available, including Braille and ASL to help your patrons. Okay, what if you don't know how to use a computer or you physically can't use a computer? You can complete the form over the phone. You could talk to an enumerator when they come to your door. Staff can give technical help, but you should not collect information to then put into the census form later. This is a bit of a tricky one for library staff. We know that we're often asked to go above and beyond to help people, especially around technology. But we can't offer the same security protections and confidentiality protections as a Census Bureau employee that has taken a lifetime oath. So it's probably best to err on the side of caution here. And there are other ways that you can help somebody, whether it's pushing them to complete it over the phone, again, or talking to an enumerator. So you have other options. And I have included this in previous trainings, but we are currently unsure whether you can request a paper form, actually. We've heard conflicting things from the Census Bureau. Previously, we had found information that said you would be able to request a paper form once you receive a mailer, but we're unsure. Rest assured, though, if you're not comfortable going online or completing it over the phone, then you will get a paper form eventually. It will come to you, and you can complete it then. Again, do not use the forward or back buttons in your browser, only the ones in the form.
So in terms of actually being a census hub, again, like I said earlier, these are pretty broad parameters. But first, you should register as a hub, so that will get you onto the Census Hub map. You can do that on the website that I shared earlier, becounted2020.org. And getting that map, I think, is going to be really helpful for our community. They'll be able to see what locations are nearby, where can they go and get assistance, find information about hours and ADA accessibility. So I think that's probably the single most important thing you can do. Create a space if you can. If you would like to dedicate a space where you have an iPad set up or a computer, you have your outreach materials, relevant language guides, you can go ahead and do that. At my library, we have enough technology that I'm not going to dedicate a computer, but I have set up a table with information. I've printed out a few language guides that I know are commonly spoken languages. So that could be something you can consider doing. And as Kelsey mentioned earlier, you could also print out that information about what won't be on the form to help people avoid scams. Consider security. We'll talk about IT best practices in the next slide. Try to mitigate barriers. So how can you remove challenges to access? Something that we were thinking about for libraries would be the example of requiring a library card to get onto the computer. Not everybody has a card, so we can suspend that requirement so that anybody can access our technology. Get loud. You can promote completing the census through your social media, get good information out there, put something in your newsletter, and just get your staff prepared. You can share resources, allow time to watch that intro video. I really like that video. There are a ton, but that one in particular, it's our first look at the online census. So that's really something that's new to everyone this year.
Okay, some IT best practices, particularly pertinent if you have dedicated technology. Think about setting it up in a large format interface. Make sure, obviously, that you have a secure and up-to-date browser, and preferably one of the more mainstream browsers. If you can set up the device in guest mode or restrict access to the official Census Bureau address, that would be ideal. Most iPads, Chromebooks, small tablets of that description, they can be set up in guest mode. Or you can consider other things like the library system has a unifying technology system that has been prepared for the census for some time now. So we're going to have a desktop icon on every publicly accessible computer that immediately links to the official Census Bureau website. So people can just click on that and go straight through to the right address. And also, some libraries have the option to have that as a default, come up as the default when you open any browser. So if you can do something similar in your organization, that would be great. For libraries, we have a public coming in and using the same computer one after the other. So it was important for us to consider doing mandatory deep freezes between patron sessions for their safety and security. This is something that we do in the majority of cases, but we just tightened up those restrictions so that it was even more safe and secure, particularly for the census period. And again, you just have to make sure your general security is up to date. I've also seen recommendations from this report that we have linked, that preparing for the digital decennial census. If you can restore a device to factory settings, then that's a really great place to start from for security. And if you're allowing people to access Wi-Fi, it's a good idea to have a password. Just these additional considerations. Again, the official Census Bureau website is there. It's the my2020census.gov.
So this slide has a few of the official recommendations for stakeholders. This is from the Census Bureau, and really they do just want to emphasize that only Census Bureau employees are authorized to collect data from the public. That's because they take that oath and will face, pretty serious consequences if they do violate confidentiality. So when you are making a device available or helping someone, just make sure you're clear about that. I mention this a lot in our trainings. The people who come into our locations really do trust us. And so it is kind of a judgment call on what you feel comfortable helping people with. So I mentioned this on this slide as well. Do not collect information from people to enter later into the website. And I feel like that's a common sense kind of thing, but also we all work with people who have, very limited digital literacy skills, and people like to do things like that. Because they do, we're trusted community resources. But another important thing to know is that the online response form is set up to accept multiple responses from a single IP address. So, it does allow for public places to serve as census hubs and to allow many people to log on and fill out the form.
Another thing I wanted to mention is that if you're planning a Get Out the Count door knocking campaign, you need to cease operations relatively soon, I believe, definitely by May. And there is an official date that the Census Bureau has provided. It's in that question and answers for stakeholders supporting the 2020 census document. But obviously, we need to make sure that there's no confusion about who is walking around and door knocking. So please be cognizant of that if you are planning a door knocking campaign. And similarly, if you're planning to do robocalls to try and encourage your community members to complete the census, you have to be very careful about how that's done. And I would, before moving forward with that, review the document that we have linked there. That's official recommendations from the Census Bureau. Okay, the Census Hub timeline follows the general census timeline that we had outlined before. So you really should be starting to get either your space or your technology ready right now. As soon as you finish the webinar, get some things together, print some things out. you can start with general promotional materials, and then by March 12th, you can switch over to kind of actionable, you can complete the census here messaging. Households, again, will start to receive their census ID number March 12th. And really, it would be good for us all to keep promoting the self-response right through to July 31st. So if you're going to be a census hub and have technology available, July 31st would ideally be the last day that you have it open, encouraging people to self-respond. Because as we know, perhaps people are reticent to open the door to a census employee, but they can still be completing that themselves online or over the phone. So let's keep encouraging people to respond right up until that deadline. And as you're talking to your community members, your neighbors about the census, consider what people are motivated by. And people are motivated by the hyper-local. We know that census data is used to inform our political districts, and we know that, for instance, Pennsylvania is at risk of losing a representative this year because of the way that the population has shifted around the country. But these things have been shown to not be strong motivators for people to complete the census. What is a strong motivator is when you link it to what people use on the daily or what they come across. They're motivated by their children's school lunch program. They're motivated by their commute to work. They're motivated by resources that their neighbors depend on. So as much as possible, relate it back to Allegheny County, to Pittsburgh, and to even more locally, to Braddock, to Mount Washington, wherever you are. So a really great talking point is one from Jefferson Counts, their 2020 Census Toolkit. If you miss a family of 5 in this census, it's equal to a loss of $100,000 in resources to our community. So for every person that's missed in Pennsylvania for this decennial census, it's equivalent to about $2,000 per person per year. It really adds up quickly when you consider a family of 5, $100,000. That's huge. And then we've gone over some of these other ones, where census data goes and how it directs federal funds. And as much as possible, think about how you can, keep relating it back to people and be those multiple touch points that will get somebody to take an action. It's meant to be something like eight touches before somebody is motivated to act. So if we can be 2 of those and hope that the Census Bureau is 2 more and they're getting 2 more somewhere else, we're adding to this. It doesn't have to be us alone, it's us collectively.
So these are just some of the resources that have come together through the Complete Count Committee. Again, the website is a really good place to start. It's where you can go to register to be a hub. You can sign up for the newsletter. And, you can get free resources. So some of the examples on here include general talking points or information about the census. Coming soon, there will also be some translated documents in 7 languages that the committee partnered with global wordsmiths to get. So, those will be really relevant to our community, and they're all freely available. And you should feel free to borrow or steal or use whatever you can from our website. And there are also some really great social media channels. YouTube has a series of videos with community members and people who were part of the committee. And so those are really helpful. Something that I've done is I often have these videos kind of playing on a loop. I have a screen in my department at the library, so I have the resource to do that, and it's just kind of a nice thing where people can stop and gives them something to look at other than a printed page. But also there's a Facebook site and Twitter. And you can use these official hashtags, BeCountedSWPA, BeCountedPGH, and BeCounted Allegheny County to kind of share what you're doing, and people who follow those tags will see it. So it's a good way to get the word out and also promote what your organization is doing. And this is the map. This is what the Census Partner and Hub map looks like. It's going to be posted on becounted2020.org, and it just gives you an idea of where hubs are located, where they are needed. I see a lot of big blank space on there, so if you fill any of those areas, I certainly hope you'll consider being a hub, because we really want to make sure everyone in the county is being reached. And then these are just some more resources. Some of them are kind of library focused because that is Kelsey's and my background, but I think they're helpful to anyone, no matter what your organization is. But some of the more general ones would be the Jefferson Counts 2020 Census Toolkit, which is a really great resource for anyone in the county, I think, but particularly those of you in the Mon Valley area. Keystone Counts is the statewide resource. Census Bureau has a social hub for shareable content. You can use any of that for free. This is an example. That image is one of the things you can find. We liked it because it was library related, but there are many, many more. The Greater Pittsburgh Nonprofit Partnership has resources, and YWCA has a Why Women Count site, and that has a lot of great resources focused at getting an accurate count, particularly aimed at women. Then the American Library Association has been really working on getting the word out. California Library Association has a really helpful toolkit preparing your library for the 2020 census. That I recommend for anyone, even if you're not a library, because it gives you a lot of very specific programming ideas and also budgetary requirements, which can be very helpful. And then I always like to mention Counted in Libraries, which was a project that I worked on with other libraries from around the country, and we were brainstorming and coming up with ways to reach new Americans particularly. And on that website, you can find links to other resources and some templates for posters or bookmarks that can be customized and printed out. And as a hub or a partner, you might want to consider promotional ideas and activities. And, so if you already have programming, how can you tie it in with what you're already doing? So one example would be I teach a number of digital literacy classes, and I'm building in extra time at the end of them in April and May so that people can stay and get some help with the computer to fill out their census. Census.gov has a lot of educator resources and programming. Space County is an app that was developed by CMU students, and it's kind of a census game. It's really cute. It's really fun. If you have iPads for children or something like that, you can just download it and have it available. There's a book called We All Count, which is not an official Census Bureau publication, but it was vetted by the census, and it's a counting book aimed at young children. And one of the nice things about it is that it's very diverse. All the families in it are actual families. And so that's another really good opportunity, to kind of target families and young children. And there was also a K-12 video competition through Allegheny Intermediate Unit, and that I believe is completed, but if you look it up, you can go online and vote. So if you do teen programming or anything like that, you could have your group, vote on what their favorite video is and get involved that way.
If I could just add to that, the We All Count census books will be at every library location in the county, at least 2 copies per location, and there should be additional copies in different languages coming soon. So if you'd like to have a story time, or if you'd like to borrow out that book, get in touch with your local library. I'm sure they'd be excited to partner with you.
Okay, social media tools. Again, I kind of went over this a few slides ago, but I do encourage you to follow the Twitter and Facebook and YouTube accounts and to use those hashtags. I don't tweet a lot myself, but I do like following hashtags, and it's been really fun over the past couple of months for me to see people using them more and see more activity and just get ideas from what other people are doing. And of course, if you see misinformation or disinformation, please do report that to rumors@census.gov.
Okay, and now is the time where we will consider some of the questions that you've been putting to us, and I think we'll start though by going over some of the questions we've received in previous trainings. Oftentimes it's a nice way to jog your memory and to think about additional questions. So if it's fine with you, I might pose some of the questions. We have them on note cards, and we'll just roll through some of them, and then we'll get to your questions as well. So somebody had previously asked, what are the penalties, if any, for failing to complete the census? The census is a constitutionally mandated process where the Census Bureau says they want everybody to complete their census. However, there's never been a time where somebody there was a penalty for failing to complete the census or for submitting a census. The Census Bureau would like everybody to complete all of the questions on the census. However, if you were to miss one question, there isn't a penalty. And when you're completing the census online, you can still skip through and go to the next question without answering. It's not one of those online forms where you're required to put in an answer to move forward. That being said, it's obviously preferable to complete this as much as you can of the census. If there are questions that you have community members who feel reticent to provide that information, then it should be fine for them to leave that blank and move on. The more, though, that you leave the census incomplete, the greater likelihood that you might have a follow-up Census Bureau employee knocking on your door wanting to complete the census. Again, this isn't tied one for one. It's not if you don't complete a certain number of questions, you will have a follow-up door knock, but you should be fine not to complete certain parts of your census.
Yeah, I think the biggest concern would be if you have people who are worried about a government official showing up at their door, encourage them to fill it out, because otherwise someone will come to their door. The other big thing, is that it's a big loss of resources, for the more that's left unanswered, equals, money that your community's not getting.
And we have heard that the Census Bureau, as much as possible, wants to have an accurate picture of every person who is being counted, right? So if you were logged in the 2010 census and then in the 2020 census, don't complete a question in there, the Census Bureau might go back to previous census data and try and fill in that information. So say you don't feel comfortable supplying or subscribing to male or female the question, you could leave that blank, or perhaps you would feel better self-identifying with what works best for you instead of leaving it blank and the potential for that to be filled in for you. Again, it's really about when you're considering the family structure, and the video does a really good job of running through what options you have, so definitely have a look there. But if you still feel like it's not reflective of your situation, your family situation, then put what is reflective of your family situation. Got that.
Okay, so we had a question from another presentation. Is there a long and a short form? Yes, there is. The long form is that American Community Survey. That's, if you've ever written a grant or used American Fact Finder for anything, you have probably used American Community Survey data. I got it one year and I was really excited because I like the census, but it is very long and very invasive, and it's sent out to a sampling of people. And it's confusing because it is being sent out in 2020, so some people might get that. And that one does ask about citizenship. It asks about disability status. It asks how many bathrooms you have in your house. Like, it is very, very granular. The census that we're talking about is the decennial census. It is 10 questions, and it goes out to everyone. So it's much more basic. It is more complete in terms of who gets it. But if you get confusion about it, that's the difference. The American Community Survey goes out to a sampling. It's very random who gets it, and it has a lot of good data, especially if you're a nonprofit, but it does cause some confusion.
Somebody had asked if you have to wait for the postcard or your ID number to complete your info, or if you could go on today, say, and complete it. What we know is that the telephone lines open March 9th. So that's today, right? But the online response won't be open until March 12th. Again, you don't have to wait until you receive a mailer, say you get it on March 15th. You can go on March 12th and complete it with your address, but you can also wait until you receive the postcard. Perhaps you're really, really keen, and that would be fine.
So we had gotten a question also about how are students overseas counted? And the answer to that is that they are not. They don't live here, so they don't get counted here. But students who are from overseas who are studying here, and I work in Oakland, so I know there's a huge population of students from other countries studying in Pittsburgh. They do get counted because they are living here. So it really is who's living here April 1st.
And I'd like to add to that, we know that the universities in Pittsburgh let out earlier for breaks than other universities around the country. And the Census Bureau knows that also. So the census operations actually begin a little earlier in Pittsburgh for the students of Pittsburgh. They want to count people here before they go out for their break. So we've had a question previously from somebody wondering, okay, my student is moving back home, is coming back, from an interstate university. Do I count them here, or do I count them? Are they counted in their place of schooling? And the answer should be where they have spent the majority of their time, kind of retroactively. So if we have students here April 1st in Pittsburgh, they need to be counted here because that's where they've used resources. And they haven't been, in Minnesota using Minnesotan resources. So we need to make sure that they're counted here. We've had questions previously from people wondering if tenants need to know the name of their landlord and have that for the census. Again, just emphasizing that the Census Bureau doesn't care who the owner of the house is necessarily. They just want to know who is living there. So if you're a renter, then you should put in your information and select that you are renting. And again, the video runs through it quite clearly. It also has options for whether you pay mortgage or whether you outright own your home, but it's not interested in who has a mortgage if you're the renter or if you're staying without payment. You should it's your information that they're interested in.
Should we go through some of the questions coming in?
Yeah.
Okay. So somebody asked about whether or not census hubs have to distribute and collect paper questionnaires. And the answer is no to both of those. We cannot get paper questionnaires, even if we wanted to. That's a question that's come up a lot at libraries because people always want to come in and get the paper form. Mm-hmm. Those are tied to an address, so we can't just get general forms. And if you're a hub, do you need to provide a phone for those who need to call? And the answer to that is also no. If you have the means to do that and are interested in doing that, you certainly can. But I know, especially those of us who, serve the public, sometimes that can be really tricky to provide phone service to everyone, so you certainly don't have to.
And thinking about if you have patrons or community members coming in who don't have a physical address but would like to be counted in the census, then direct them to complete the census over the phone. We think that's the best option to make sure that they're counted. The address is really the only thing that you absolutely have to complete the census online. So if you have people who are unsure how they can be counted without one, I would direct them towards the phone lines.
I love the next question because it's something that I know is going to come up. Can we enter the information for a patron and submit it with them sitting there if they aren't comfortable with computers? That, I feel like, is just a judgment call. I think it's a little different from them handing it to you, but again, make sure they know you're not a Census Bureau employee. You're not bound to those consequences. You are bound to professional ethics, but you're not going to go to jail. But again, we are trusted people in our community. I've had people hand me their credit card with no problem, or give out their social security number, had me help with their bank. It's stuff that I'm not even necessarily that comfortable with, but we know that people are going to do it. So I wouldn't have them write it down. That just feels, above and beyond what is safe. But if you need to sit with them to help them, my unofficial answer is that it's probably fine.
And the Census Bureau's official language in that questions and answers for stakeholders supporting the 2020 census, that document that we had linked to throughout the presentation, I am quoting here, they say, if a member of the public requests assistance in completing their form, please direct them to the other response options like online, phone, mail, paper, census taker visit to the home that best suits their needs. If they still request your assistance with online response, you can provide this assistance, but please inform them you are not a Census Bureau employee and therefore their answers are not protected by law with you. So there isn't anything that has come out from the Census Bureau that has said officially, no, you cannot help somebody sit beside them and put in the self-response with them, but it's always advisable to take those other steps as much as possible first, and then it's kind of a last resort that we're not precluded from doing that. There's no kind of follow-up action if you do.
A couple people asked if we will be sharing out the slides, and yes, we will. Also, the webinar is being recorded, so you will have access to the whole thing if you have staff that want to watch it. But yeah, you will receive the slides.
A mobile resident, somebody had asked who is a mobile resident, and without having the slide in front of me, we're talking about people who are living in places like marinas, RV parks, other transitory locations. Those people are counted through the the in-person interviews that the Census Bureau will coordinate. So I hope that answers the question.
Can a person without a document be counted? Yes, and they should be, because we need resources for them. I think, as a non-ICE government employee, I think those people really need a lot of the resources and should be counted. They will not be contacted by immigration. This information really is separate from who they are. I think it's 80 years before the information can actually be released and tied to their name for like genealogy research or something like that. So I would encourage everyone to get counted.
And this just in, the video competition that we mentioned earlier, that is actually still open until March 15th. So you can, we will send out the information in the follow-up email, make sure you have it, but you can still be submitting, and then after that March 15th deadline, then is the time to vote on your favorites.
Okay, somebody had asked about filling out the pre-form, and I think maybe they responded that that's what they had filled out.
There are probably other questions in the chat if you want to check. Yeah, you just hover over the green.
Okay, Hannah, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Hannah has been so helpful for us.
No problem. Just wanted to say, too, that I think our city and our county are really fortunate to have such knowledgeable folks, such as you all, in institutions that are so well trusted by our community. So I think that just means we are really well prepared here in Allegheny County and hoping to spread the wealth and the knowledge to other places around the region. Okay, we do have some lovely questions in the chat. So how about we start with a question regarding accessibility. So do you all know how to get the Braille and large print guides, and how could we facilitate that for folks on the webinar?
Great question. I don't know for sure, but I'm assuming it's in what we've linked to in our 59 language guides. We can check on that and we can send that out, but I had thought I had seen the guides, or the way that you can request those guides on that website. Apologies, not sure off the top of my head, but we will investigate.
Do you know if the actual census forms, if they'll be available in Braille and large print, like printed out?
I'm fairly sure there is a large print version. I don't know about Braille, though.
Okay.
They can call. And I know there also is an option for the assisted telephone display device for people who are hard of hearing or deaf.
And for library staff, consider that you probably have Zoom and, JAWS and Zoom Text are our low vision assistance programs on publicly accessible computers. So also for organizations who are interested, you can always direct people to a local library for those resources.
Great. Yeah. So there's an interesting question regarding being a census hub. So if an organization's a census hub right now, but say with concerns regarding the spread of COVID-19 and the great interaction that we have with the public, what are some kind of suggested approaches regarding that?
So libraries have been thinking about this because obviously we're publicly accessible places. I would refer to when or if the county health department shares information, this should be our guide. I would say you can take some steps to ensure you're as safe and as you can be with some simple steps now, but I don't think that we need to jump to action just yet. We'll collectively follow the county health resources that come out.
Got it. Thanks so much for that. And then there was a question about data too. So where can nonprofits find the same data, like the list of federally funded programs by the census?
That's from the George Washington Institute, I believe. Yes, it's on our slide. The George Washington Institute of Public Policy, they examined the 16 largest federal assistance programs that distribute funds through census data. And it's called the Counting for Dollars Project. When you get the slides, you'll be able to see that's on our some of our earlier slides.
Great, awesome. So I think we saw something else go in the Q&A, perhaps. Okay, great question. So as an organization who has received a mini grant and signed up as a partner, woohoo, fantastic, congratulations. Are there any posters in different languages that they would either need to create or maybe have access to from the census?
It depends on the language, I think. I know that through the Complete Count Committee, there will be 7 languages available, and also through the Census Bureau. Posters, I don't know. I know that there are flyers in a number of different languages, and a lot of those are just available on their social media hub site.
And the county and the city will start providing the swag and the copies of the handouts at the end of this week. They'll start to send those out. So if you sign up to be a census hub and you've requested some of those materials and you've selected what languages are most appropriate for your community, they should be coming out pretty soon.
Very cool. And then I think there was another question regarding kind of movement of addresses, and this might be related to if someone lives in, say, like a mobile park, or like if someone moves between now, April 1st or May 1st, are there any suggestions as to how they should fill out the census? Obviously, we want to count everyone once and in the right place.
Mm-hmm. And that should be on April 1st.
Yeah,
That's the kind of like line in the sand. April 1st, it's no joke, but it is National Census Day. And that is kind of the line in the sand. So if where you're living, April 1st should be the household that you respond through. So if you move after then, you should still, you should respond beforehand. That's probably the best course of action.
Awesome. Great. And then I also wanted to plug a little bit too, that in addition to this webinar and the amazing resources that are available on becounted2020.org, at GPNP at our link, which is in the presentation as well, we have various studies that were done nationally for different audiences, whether it's the faith community, Latinx, Asian Americans, specifically even have their own website regarding like their languages and specific resources. So if you're looking for, say, some audience-specific materials, there are some there nationally and regionally and statewide, so maybe you can start collecting those for your nonprofit so that folks can be really prepared in addition to these local trainings. It seems that those are all of the questions.
I did think I thought I saw, like, what are the resources up a little higher on our webinar chat? What are the resources available to help train staff? And yes, we might have gone through that a little bit today, but just to emphasize, we have a resource guide, like a quick cheat sheet that we developed for library staff so they could have on hand at the desk. And also share that out, you know, in staff meetings, and we'd be happy to share that out with everybody. It has all of the telephone numbers for the language guides, assistance via the phone. It has some of that important information about when you can provide assistance and how to provide assistance. It has talking points, it has the timeline, some other helpful links, the IT best practices, so we can share that out. It's pretty applicable outside of library land.
Thanks so much. Yeah, I appreciate you pointing that out and sharing it with everyone. Awesome. Also some lovely comments. So thank you all. If those are all the questions, are there any kind of final thoughts, takeaways before?
Yeah, I just guess encouragement to complete the count, to have an accurate count, such a huge impact for our region.
And again, I think, you know, signing up to be a partner or a hub, a lot of us are already doing this kind of work anyway. We're working with the community, we're helping them with digital literacy and technology, and so this really isn't anything beyond our usual mission.
Right. It doesn't have to be onerous. Just do what you can.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. So thank you so much for this webinar. So just on behalf of GPNP, just really thankful for the partnership with the Complete Count Committee, the city, the county, our local libraries. Truly, as a collective effort, we wouldn't be on such a, I'd say, a positive note going into really census time. So your all's contact info is here. There'll be a follow-up email with these slides, multiple resources mentioned, this recording. So thank you, everyone who has joined us today. We really appreciate your time and your commitment to this effort, and we hope that we all have a successful and accurate count this year.